podcast where we discuss the people, places, and events all around Kestrel Country. Welcome to another episode of the Kestrel Country podcast. I'm your host, Mike Church, and today we got a fun episode talking about fly fishing. So this time of year, I'm always eager to get out and enjoy those rivers, and a couple of my friends, Isaac Grauke and Ian Kern, joined me today to talk a little bit about fly fishing. We talk about everything from river beers and what that is, all the way into how they got into it, some tips, some places. So hope you all enjoy talking or listening to a little conversation about North Idaho fly fishing. Are we gonna drink those beers, or
it's like we got to do it like a tutorial
on the beers?
Because
we should start with that.
Yeah, lead in.
If Mike's a good producer, he's recording already. So,
all right,
I'll leave that up to your
this is where the magic,
imagination.
This is where the magic happens.
Yeah. So, river beers.
Ian introduced me to this, actually.
Oh,
I think you have to know how to do this to be a guide, right? A river guide.
Actually, I probably found it on Instagram. There's an outfit out of California, Taco Fly Company. Pretty fun guys. They're into tacos, good Mexican food, and fly fishing. And I saw this video originally when they first posted it about the river beer, and I thought, that looks awesome. And I think I introduced to you, a couple of years ago on the river, and it just becomes a thing. You bring all these ingredients and you make them in the boat, and then you serve up these like fake beer cocktails that are spicy and delicious.
Yeah.
It's a good way to take a plain lager and make it drinkable.
Yeah. So, Isaac, you should walk us through this as you go, because we do have the phone rolling, but the majority of our audience is certainly audio.
Yeah. So this is, normally you're not allowed to drink these unless you're on the river, but we're going to make an exception. We just got like a basic. This is a 10-barrel brewing company pub beer lager. Any cheap lager works. And the way Ian taught me, you got to crack the top.
This is the hardest part.
Very carefully, because you don't want to pop it all the way. Oh, just a little bit. I don't know if I can do this on.
You need a teeny tiny crack.
You have to be floating. It might not work.
I'm not gonna go too far with it. Just let a little air out. Okay, then we go lime. And you want to fill the top of the can with lime juice. We've got a fresh cut lime here.
So do you want enough of a hole to where that lime juice leaks in, or no? Not really.
I mean, it's going to get in eventually.
Ian says you do.
You do, but the problem is that I only have
But it's hard.
I only have 3 beers, and so if you ruin one, I don't have any more.
Yeah.
There's definitely variations on things you put on the top, but there has to be lime and tahini. I like to add hot sauce. Isaac's got a great setup there. Some people use like
Tapatio.
Salsa works.
A legitimate like salsa, liquid salsa.
All right, so we got lime juice, fresh squeezed lime juice on the tops of the can, and then we add a little salt right on.
Yeah, I can see how sunshine, the river, like it would certainly enhance what's going on
100%.
here.
Okay, tahini. You guys know this from your margaritas. This is like spicy. It's like, I don't know. How would you describe
Spice.
it? A little bit of that on top.
More salt.
Yeah, spicy salt. Tapatio. You can use any hot sauce, but I like this stuff.
I like a good
splash
habanero sauce.
I like Tapatio is kind of my go-to, like on eggs, and yeah.
All right,
it's good.
So you got to take the first drink because the action is opening it all the way,
Mm-hmm.
and then all that stuff dumps in, and it's going to foam and pour out.
Yeah.
So your first
drink
chug
is a
has
long
to
one.
be enough
Yeah, so
to
probably
clear
not
the top of the can.
directly over the soundboard.
Correct.
It's probably
I'll give you this video. You can cut it into your master video.
there. You go.
Well, cheers
Cheers.
Hey,
to
cheers
talking about fly fishing.
to talking about it.
And then you got to kind of monitor it because it's going to want to come fizzing back up again. But I think I did a pretty good job.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Definitely enhances the old plain Jane lager.
Here's for the microphone.
There you are. Now that should be Kestrel Country. Crack.
That's right. That should be our new opening. Well, I definitely need to find more guests who bring drinks. This is, although we do record a lot of these at 9 a.m. So
Yeah, well,
for the record, it's
not.
5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
River Beer, Taco Fly Company.
Yeah.
Don't
Thanks,
float
Isaac.
without it.
That's the way to start a podcast right there. Man. So Isaac Grauke with the intro there and Ian Kern.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
There's going to be plenty of breaks when I'm drinking beer.
I suggest we record a third podcast at some point on a boat. Riverside.
Yeah, on the river.
Yeah, that needs to happen for sure. I often wondered why I don't do that on location.
Well,
On a
different
boat,
equipment.
on a boat's a little different, but I mean, like at a camp, that'd be easy to do.
Absolutely.
You
Riverside.
gotta have the river in the background. So we are supposed to talk about fishing, but what I usually like to do is start off with a little background, little intro. So maybe Isaac, we'll start with you.
Sure.
Just tell us a quick bit about yourself and maybe how you got into fishing. Fly fishing in particular. We're going to talk about fly fishing. I mean, it's the best kind of fishing.
Sounds good. Yeah, Isaac Grauke, lived in Moscow since mid-90s. I was 12 when we moved here, and so grew up here a lot. And my parents got into fly fishing and took us out quite a bit early on. I wasn't really into it, but I am very grateful that they sort of drugged me out there. And we found the St. Joe River pretty early on and had a raft. So spent a lot of time rafting and time on the water and trying to figure out how to catch fish. And we were pretty terrible, but we got started, which is sometimes the hardest part.
Wasn't there some story about you getting either waders or a rod or something for a birthday and being really upset about it?
Yeah, I can't remember if I told that story last time, but yeah, when I was 12 or 13, I said to my parents, I don't want to tell you specifically what I want. Just think about me. I wanted to be understood.
Surprise.
That's the
Think
last
about
time that happened.
me and get me what you think that I would want. And so I thought it was going to be basketball shoes because I was really into sports and so I opened up a box that was the right size for basketball shoes, but it ended up being a pair of neoprene Hodgman waders, and I cried. I burst into tears as a 12-year-old, which is completely unacceptable. But yeah, so we laugh about that, tell that story a lot. But now I got waders again. I don't know, 10 years or so ago, and I didn't cry that time. But yeah, no, for me, I was into it a little bit, not much as a kid. And then after having my own kids, started getting into it a lot more, and we started camping. We've got like a seasonal campsite. We park trailers up on the St. Joe, and we've got drift boats and go up and hang out, ride dirt bikes and fish the river. And so it's just kind of become part of our seasonal rhythm. Something we do every year.
Was there a defining time when you remember, okay, I'm into fly fishing?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Or did it kind of just progress naturally?
No, for sure. I think it was a combination of getting to a point in my career where I'm like, all right, I'm settled. I know what I'm doing. And then just coming to the realization that I live in Idaho and there's all these amazing things that we have around us. And Mike and I actually took a trip to Rock Creek, just past Missoula in Montana, Took my dad's camper. This was in 2009. And we were like, let's go fly fishing. And I think at that time we'd both done it a little bit, but it felt new. And kind of didn't look back from there. Just started doing more and more of that.
Yeah, I'm curious. I had a similar question, but curious what that, obviously there was that timing, but what would you say it is about fly fishing that kind of got you, either changed your mind about it or that keeps you hooked to it to this day? Hooked. Maybe with the puns today.
Yeah, I mean,
what do you love about fly fishing?
Yeah. Well, initially, this is maybe just a very small part of it, but I think looking out from the outside at people who do fly fishing, it was this mysterious thing that was like, I like those people. I think what they're doing is neat, and I'm completely intimidated. So, and this was the same thing with, hunting, even like farming and like starting to raise animals. It was this thing looking at from the outside that was intriguing, but kind of like, man, I have no idea how to do that. And so then crossing that barrier and just deciding to say, you know what, let's just grab some used gear, borrow some stuff and go and be willing to completely make fools of ourselves. I think we caught like 5 fish, between the 4 guys that were on that trip.
All accidentally.
Totally. Yeah.
Tiny little fish.
And we took pictures with every single one, It was like, we did it. I tricked a fish. And then there's a whole like stages to it too, because then you get obsessed and then you can't think of anything else. And then it's all about numbers. And like we would be camping on the river and I'd see a rise and it's like, I just had breakfast or whatever, but I'm like, I got to go catch that fish. And you're annoying to be around. Your family's like, oh, he's out there again. And then you kind of settle into this comfortable space where you like to fish, you catch fish. But like I'll have times when I'll go drive the river and look at the river and like, I don't even bring a rod. I just want to look at the river or snorkeling, like river snorkeling.
I was going to say, have you ever swam?
Yeah. Watch fish. Yeah, absolutely. One of my like most, the coolest moments in nature I guess that's the way I put it. The coolest moment in nature would be this time I swam up behind a rising cutthroat and just watched it from like 10 feet away. You just kind of go up and take a breath, come back down. And it was just like, it would come up off the bottom and grab something and go back down. And then I just snuck away. It was cool.
That's awesome. That was good. Ian.
Yeah.
What was your journey like? Where are you from?
I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, Tracktown, USA.
Amen.
It's a beautiful location. It sits like 45 minutes from the Pacific coast, 45 minutes from the Cascade Mountains. And then it's in between 2 rivers kind of come through, the Mackenzie River and the Willamette. So it's just a rich outdoors sports enjoyment environment. And I grew up in a family that loved getting out and family camping, car camping, but really didn't do much more than that. And I think in high school, I got into the Boy Scouts because I loved being outside. So I got involved in Boy Scouts and mountain rescue and boating and just anything I could do outside. So I didn't necessarily get into fly fishing until probably my senior year, sadly, because it's like, oh, I had all these great opportunities and I never utilized it. But for me, I think I graduated high school early, traveled in Europe a bit, came back home. Kids today call it a gap year. I just was not in school or had plans for doing that, and became a river guide. So I took river rafting clients down, mostly the Mackenzie and other rivers in Oregon, the Wahi, the Klamath, the Rogue, the Deschutes. And I probably just saw guys fly fishing and thought, I want to do that. I'd never really fished before that. I wasn't a spinner guy, and had the opportunity to just buy a rod and fish like a lot. So I can remember one summer I was guiding on the Mackenzie primarily, but I go up in the morning and fish for 20, 30 minutes before clients showed up, do a raft trip, and then, 3:00 when the day's done, fish for an hour or 2 before I went home, all on the Mackenzie. The Mackenzie River is kind of historical because that's where the the Mackenzie River drift boat was sort of first
Yeah.
invented, developed, or used, which is we all know them as drift boats, but maybe some of our listeners don't. It's based off of an ocean or big water dory. So it's got a bow and stern that look identical. And then the original boats, which were all made out of wood, had a really high rocker, so a big round bottom. So you could maneuver the rapids, and it just became a way of fishing. So the Mackenzie drift boat was sort of a small version of the dory. And then I think they developed even a couple others. I don't remember what other river. There's another one that's named after. But basically, out of Oregon, how do you get down these rivers and fish them all along the way?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of drift boats. I mean, you'd see them everywhere. There were boat builders in town, people on the river in boats. And so I was just kind of around it.
Is it a pretty major destination for fly fishing?
It is. I would not have known that growing up, but when you get outside of where you're from and talk to people, like, oh, one of my bucket list rivers is to go fish the Mackenzie, even in a drift boat. And I've, read articles in different publications over the years, people coming from other parts of the world to come fish Oregon and fish the Mackenzie River, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Did you, when you were first getting into it, you were river guiding, so you were in rafts, right?
Yep.
Did you fish out of a drift boat early on, or were you I think a lot of people, and I know that was my experience, was entering it just, wading and from shore. I don't know. It was probably I don't think I had been in a drift boat fishing until I went in your boat a few years back.
Yeah. I can't even remember the first time I was in a drift boat. We were in the raft early on, but actually like a hard bottom drift boat. I don't know. I can't even remember.
Yeah. I think, I kind of got into river culture. So I was hanging out with a bunch of people who loved the adrenaline rush of rafting and doing stuff in rapids or kayaking. But then there was also sort of people who just love the water and love fishing and love boats. So I had a guide friend who had a drift boat, and he'd let me just borrow it and take it out. So I definitely fished a few times early on in a drift boat because I had access to people who had boats. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different experience. So
I still fish with that rod I bought in high school. It's an old Orvis Clearwater.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Classic.
It's a great rod.
I have one of those too that I think I was probably in high school when I got it.
And it's funny, you talk about the progression of learning about fish, about fishing, about fly fishing. There is ground to cover. You need to learn a lot.
Yeah.
Because I remember just probably a good year of just going out to they're water. It's water. There must be fish in there. I'll throw something out there and I'll probably catch something. But I had no idea what I was doing. And it only enriches your experience as you learn more and experience more and do more, that I think fly fishing becomes more fun.
Yeah.
Now we talk about targeting species, going to certain places to fish for certain fish. And it's just, makes it more rich.
I still watch videos that I'm like, man, I'm casting wrong. Or I need to get my elbow in or whatever. Mm-hmm. You're still learning. It's kind of one of those things you're always getting better.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the attractions to the sport of fly fishing is there's a lot of things like that, but I would honestly I think golf has some similarities in terms of it is
gross.
You can it's gross, it's terrible. No, it's something you can get into and then you can always be learning, you can always be getting better. That's probably true of anything.
That's what it should be with everything.
What it should be with everything. But I think maybe not to the same degree, but it's something you can do for a long, long time, right? It can be very physical. You can hike way back into a crazy place and wait, right? But it can be relatively, something you can do when you're older and you can learn your whole life about it and continuing to find new things, new techniques, gear. I mean, I know I'm a gear hound. I think most fly fishermen are. It's like there's always some new piece of gear. There's always something to get into and learn. I kind of felt that way shooting clays this past weekend. Was like, it's another one of those things. Like I could do this the rest of my life and definitely never master it. Right. Like,
but own a dozen shotguns.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also interesting, culturally what draws people to certain sports or activities. I remember probably back when I bought my rod in high school, the local fly shop in Eugene, they just talked about all the people who had watched A River Runs Through It for the first time and thought, I need to do this. And they're usually, middle-aged. They've got some income, so they just come in and buy everything. And I'm going to go do fly fishing now because it looks awesome. You made a comment about sort of looking into the sportsmen who practice fly fishing and wanting to do that. I probably had the opposite. Like I was drawn in by river people who love the water, nature, being outside, doing stuff. And that's probably that was my first love then. I did not think fly fishing or fly fishing people were people I wanted to associate with.
Yeah.
Because there was definitely a stigma of this is the pure way of catching fish. This is the only way of catching fish. And as I've done it more, I also think they make it more harder to approach, unapproachable. Like
Sure.
they make barriers that are too difficult. Really doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, I don't think I was exposed to those people who, were
Snobbish,
wearing the fancy gear and
snobs.
Yeah, that was, I didn't know too many of those people. It was more like, especially where we fish, there's not a lot of money there. There's not a lot of like rich fly fishermen or anything like that. But that's totally a thing. So that's actually good. I mean, I think, grab a pair of Chacos or sandals and just go get in a river. You don't have to go buy the waders. You don't have to buy the fancy rods. One of my favorite rods is made in Oregon. And it's like a couple $100, I mean, you can spend tons of money on that kind of gear and sure, it's fun to do that too. But I do think I think there probably are people who think of fly fishing as that sort of thing, this kind of hoity-toity
elitist.
Yeah. And like, we'll drive upriver and I'll see those guys standing in the river and, I'll kind
Maybe
of
that
laugh.
was my experience growing up on the Mackenzie because of the mystique of the river. Like that's who you'd see out there fishing. You would look down on someone in an aluminum boat.
Yeah.
Like, oh, interesting.
No, but I forget about that. So I'm glad you mentioned it because you kind of have to there are people who that's what they think of fly fishing.
Right.
What did you mean by do you have some examples of, you said you think a lot of people put up barriers or make it more unattainable than it should be. Do you have any examples of that? Just their attitude towards it, or?
I think it's the level of knowledge and things you need to know going into to be successful at fly fishing that keeps people from it.
Yeah.
So like you're not throwing out.
They make it intimidating.
Yeah. And you need to understand fish psychology and patterns and the complete bug cycle. And
if you don't have a degree in entomology, then
Right.
you're probably not going to catch fish.
And that's not true because we all make those
Go throw a piece of
purple
foam with a hook in it.
Chernobyls very productive.
Our pink pony was one of our favorite early flies, and it's literally just a huge piece of like pink foam.
Right.
And amazingly enough, it actually hit it.
Catherine loves the San Juan worm.
Absolutely.
And just kills it.
And you shouldn't look down on that or be ashamed of throwing that out there.
Yeah, I'm fine with people who are like dries only. They don't want to, nymph or whatever, or but I'm like, well, I want to catch fish. So it's more about what are the conditions and, what am I most likely to be successful with?
And I think the piece that I love the most about fly fishing is that relationship between imitating fish food and catching fish, right? But I don't get extremely deep into the weeds on that. So I don't like buying store-bought bait and lures and things to go out and catch fish because my goal is not to catch as many fish as possible. I love what's happening on the river, observation, what are the fish doing, what's hatching right now, what's not, what are my options, and just trying different things out. That to me is a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
So explain that a little bit. Hatch, dries versus nymphs.
Yeah.
Life cycle.
Yeah. I think that you make a great point that one of the really fun things about fly fishing is you get to interact and actually see a fish come up and take a fly off the surface. Whereas when you're just throwing a lure or something, they eventually hit it, but you don't get to see it. So there's a level of engagement where you kind of get the front row seat to what's happening. But yeah, I think there's lots of ways to catch fish on a fly rod, but Ian was talking about, you got dry flies, which imitate bugs that come and like sit on the surface of the water or lay their eggs on the surface of the water. And they've, made out of materials that allow them to kind of float, and they're really lightweight. And you've got these the end of your line is called the tippet. And, you've got these really fine tippets. So when you throw it out there, it kind of floats down and just sits on the water, and then the fish thinks it's a bug and goes up and eats it.
And that's what most people think of,
Yeah.
right? When they think of fly fishing, that's kind of that image, like the royal wolf. Like, it's like the fly you see embroidered on stuff.
Elk caddis.
Yeah. But then, so what's nymphing? What's the difference?
So fish do a lot of feeding subsurface underneath the water. When they're hanging out down there, they're looking for bugs that are in different stages of life. So bugs, a lot of bugs anyway, are in the river, in the water. They float up or swim up, and they hatch on the surface, and the bug takes off and flies away. Well, fish will use that as an opportunity to eat those bugs while they're hatching, coming up out of the water. And so a nymph is essentially a fly that imitates those subsurface bugs that are in some stage of hatching. And so they look all kinds of, you can make them look all kinds of different ways. Some are big, some are small, shiny, whatever. And with trout, like anytime you put something shiny on it, it attracts them. It's flashy, and they seem to, sometimes that'll make them bite a little bit more aggressively. But yeah, you can have essentially what they call in fly fishing a strike indicator, or a bobber, if you will. And so the bobber floats on the surface, and then you've got your line down to your nymph, or you can actually have a really big kind of a dry fly that it floats really well, and then you can have a line off of that dry fly. So you can actually be dry fly fishing and nymphing at the same time, which is something we do a lot of in the spring.
Yeah.
For new people listening, the big difference between fly fishing and conventional fly fishing or spinner fishing is that you're using bait to catch a fish. In fly fishing, the line, your fly line, is what takes your bait out. That's why you have all the fancy casts and the way that you have to send your line out to take your bait to the fish. In conventional fishing or spinner fishing, you're weighting your line. Your line's pretty thin. It's just strong enough.
Yeah,
for the
you're
fish
weighting
catching.
the lure.
Yes,
has
lure.
the weight.
Your bait has weight on it at that end.
Slinging that sucker out there.
Right.
Yep. And you're generally, probably an overgeneralization, but you're generally imitating other bait fish.
Correct.
Right? Like I know my background a little bit. I got into fishing, trolling in a boat,
Yeah, Mike, you got to tell your story.
Back in Michigan, well, in Canada, a lot of it. And at that point, we are imitating, right? We're imitating minnows or other fish. Sometimes we would have live minnows with a spoon and everything else. But mostly the strategy is kind of, okay, what's the temperature of the lake? Where are the fish feeding? How do we get down to that level or up to that level? And then you're trolling. You're just like, talk about the mystery of it. Like, I don't know what's going on back there.
Under the surface of the water.
It's just
magic.
You're trolling along. I mean, the fish finder is pretty exceptional innovation. But yeah, just trolling along and hoping that some big trout sees that and jumps on it. We do some casting for bass or for pike and that kind of thing, but generally all spinner fishing, and fly fishing wasn't even something. I don't even think I really even, you maybe like see it and think, oh, it's kind of a cool old school British thing or whatever, you know, but it was very much, it was all about, bass fishing and deep, big lake fishing and that kind of thing. And then my first exposure to it was out here in Idaho, because we came out, before I ever moved here years ago. And my mom and sister were doing teacher training stuff here in Moscow. And so we went down to McCall and just walked into an Orvis shop. And we were probably kind of those people that some people hate, right? That it was like, hey, I think my dad's buddy had been like, oh, you're going to Idaho? Like, you need to fly fish.
Yeah.
Something like that. So we walk into a Orvis shop in McCall and like, hey, what do we need to do? And
how do we
outfitted us with some stuff and hooked us up with a guide to take us out, and went out. And, my dad, I remember getting snagged a lot. And I finally figured out, but kind of that peek into how this is so different than what I'd grown up doing was we went to some, I don't even know what river it would have been. We went somewhere in McCall after the guide had been done, probably the Payette, and just like started casting and messing around. I'm like, just nothing, and then some guy walks up with a fly rod and he casts in a similar area where we are, boom, catches a fish. I'm like, what
Yeah.
Boom, catches another fish. So I was just like, hey, what are you fishing with? What are you doing? He's like, oh, this whatever
The
fly,
San Juan worm.
right? I don't know what it was at the time. And it's like, oh, I think I have one of those from the fly shop, tied it on. First cast, boom, get hell like, oh, this is different, right? This is a very different thing than like, hey, you put something that flashes out there and the fish is going to go for it. That was the first exposure to it. But after that, I was pretty hooked. But went back to Michigan and did some fishing in, creeks and stuff near my house and up, northern Michigan and stuff and started getting excited about it. And then coming to school in Idaho was like, this is what I got to do. Probably never put the time in to actually get good at it, but just felt like, man, be kind of like you, like I want to be in these places. Like
Right.
I want to be in the mountains on these rivers and on the creeks. Like this is what I want to be doing. And as much as I still love trolling for fish and stuff, just that active nature of it. Like I get to be out here in the mountains, wading around. I get to be hiking. I get to be casting. I get to be active the whole time rather than just like sit there with a pole and a boat trolling, reading a book.
It's not passive.
Yeah, very active. So even if you're not catching anything, it's like, man, I had an incredible day walking all over the place and seeing different country. And so
I think it's interesting that, differences between fly fishing and spinner fishing, the line, and then the bait and lures you're using. Really, it seems like in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of crossover. So now people are fly fishing with mice, minnows. They're doing a lot of stuff that normally wasn't done on fly rods, that now fly fishing seems to be an approach and a way to fish. And it looks totally different than it did 20 years ago.
That's true.
yeah, streamers.
Yeah, I know a guy that,
Right.
that ties a treble hook on a streamer.
Yeah, right.
I'm like,
And there should be no rules. There are no rules. And so it's kind of,
Well-
it's interesting.
Well, to be
how-
clear
Yeah.
to
Well,
the
there's
audience,
rules on
there are
treble
rules.
hooks.
I'm pretty sure you have to pinch the barbs.
Yeah, that's,
That is another thing in Idaho that was kind of a new thing. And maybe I will find out that I was breaking the law all the time in Michigan, but it's like, we just went out and fished and there were like limits
right.
and some size stuff, but we just fished. And I get out here and I'm like, dude, you got like, there's a lot of specific streams, specific rivers, specific bodies of water, and when can you use what and what can you use, and can you catch and release, or can you keep them? I mean, it was like,
read the book.
I always thought you catch fish and you fry them up. Like that's what you do.
Yeah, there'll be points in rivers when it's like all of a sudden there's a sign and it's like beyond this, it's single barbless only, whereas 10 feet down the river, you could have used bait or whatever.
Right.
So definitely consult your Idaho Fish and Game.
I think my wife
booklet.
loves the fact that I fly fish and loves fishing and that lifestyle, but she still doesn't understand why you'd catch a fish and throw it back. She agrees. Fish should be caught and fried.
Yeah. What's the name of that guy, that YouTube video? Have you seen that where the guy, he's a fake guide,
He
makes
makes
these funny
so
YouTube
much
videos.
fun of the
And he's
catcher,
like
trying to explain it.
Trying to explain fly fishing, catch and release to these
that's
rednecks. Yeah. You do what now? Oh, so you let them go to fatten them up so you can catch them and eat them later. It's like,
no.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point, because a lot of people think that a lot of people fish for eating fish.
Sure.
But a lot of fly fishing is not that way.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All I can say is you have, in order for there to be like these native cutthroat, you can't allow people to
Take
eat
'em all.
To eat them. I mean, it's just, you're either not going to have the resource, or you choose to put limits on it, and
Right.
people can continue to enjoy those fish, catch and release. But if we allowed you to eat even one, one per person, it just wouldn't. It could be gone. So.
Yeah.
Because they've tried. I mean, they've even tried allowing catch and keep, and then immediately they're going to have to start stocking fish, and the stocked fish outcompete the native fish, and it doesn't work. They've tried different stuff. You can even still catch, cutthroat when they interbreed with rainbows, the stocked rainbows, they turn into cut bows, and you'll still occasionally catch those because they used to stock the rainbows. I don't know how many years ago, 80s or 90s, but they stopped doing it because the cutthroat were not able to
Compete.
survive. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I remember catching my first cutthroat trout, and I was like, this is so beautiful.
Yeah.
So cool. And just like that allure, I think that's part of those different species. And what can you catch where and get them. And it's like, yeah, just catching them, getting the picture, whatever it is that's enough.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Did you see the guy that just caught the new state record cutthroat
No.
catch and release? It was in the Clark Fork. So there's a very small part of the Clark Fork that is in Idaho. So you can go, guys will go to Missoula and float the Clark Fork. But once it comes into Idaho, you've got this small stretch before it dumps into Ponderay.
Mm-hmm.
And so he must have been out in a boat. I don't even know what he was fishing with or whatever, but it was like a 24 or 26 inch cutthroat. Giant.
Wow.
Pictures online.
Just recent.
Yeah, recently.
Ooh,
well, they've
out.
only come up with ways of allowing people to do this sort of like take a picture and send it in.
Mm-hmm.
You got to demonstrate that you're measuring it, and so they can actually see how big it is, and then you release it. That hasn't been around that long.
It's got to be a little controversial too, though, because you don't want that fish out of the water too much.
Yeah, you got to be
don't want to
careful.
stress them.
You got to be careful. But because it's new, people just are breaking the record all over the place.
Huh.
Yeah. So locally, then, Isaac, you talked a little bit about the Joe, the St. Joe River. It's certainly one of the more popular places around here. For somebody just moving, because that's a lot of what we get is like, hey, I'm moving to the area. Like, I feel like I want to fly fish.
Yeah.
I'm here in Idaho now. What are some easier ways for people? I'm going to keep the puns going to wade into fly fishing.
That's good.
How'd you get it? When did you start fishing around here, Ian? Was that when you were here for school?
Yeah. So I'd say I'm new to Idaho. I moved back here 3 years ago and really started fishing. I was here in late 90s, early 2000s for college and fished occasionally then. You're busy as a college student. And then I ended up in Nashville, Tennessee, having a family, raising young kids, and went through a phase where I knew I wanted to get back to fly fishing, but it wasn't going to be anytime soon. So I literally just had that kind of in my mind. I'm putting all this stuff up on the shelf, and I know it's going to come back out in the future. I don't know when. And I'd probably say about 5-6 years ago, I started getting back into fly fishing in Tennessee, which is totally different. We don't have cold water rivers there. So you're fishing tailwater, stuff that's released from dams where the water's cold enough you can catch trout and some of the cold water species, which I was more interested in than bass and other things. But now moving back to northern Idaho and fishing here, it's I'm learning all these new rivers and rivers I've heard of for a long time but haven't fished, and it's been super fun. So every year I hope to just at least get to 1 or 2 new rivers and fish.
Exactly. Just go almost any river we have around here will have fish in it. It won't necessarily be the highest quality, but I think the only one that you're probably not going to catch fish. I don't know. At least I haven't. Well, that's not true. I did catch one in the Palouse River, but Palouse is probably one of our closest.
Small.
I was up around Laird Park, and I've heard that if you go way up the Palouse above Laird Park and you go find pools, you can catch, I think they're brook trout up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I did catch one there at Laird Park. But most sections of the Palouse, because of all the grazing that we do and the timber company all straightened all those rivers out. So when runoff comes through, it just blows it all out, and there's not enough food for the bugs to eat. So the fish don't have anything to eat. But yeah, the Palouse, but yeah, there's the St. Joe, you go down to the Locksaw, the Selway, the Clearwater.
Kooski.
Yeah, North Fork of the Coeur d'Alene.
Clearwater.
All of these rivers have great fishing. It's just a matter of picking the right time of year and go find a fly shop that'll post, fishing reports online, and people will put that information out there and when to fish them and what to fish with and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we have the internet now,
in.
right?
Yeah.
When I started fishing, there was no internet. Now I was fishing on a river. I know people catch fish in because I could see it with my eyes. But if you wanted to go to a new location, now you just Google, fly fishing certain rivers, what to expect. You potentially can find places to go. There's just a lot more information now that you can get on your phone when you're in a place. I got 45 minutes between my next, whatever I'm doing, and I'm by a river. Can I fish this? What's here? It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, something on my to-do list this year. I've never tried to catch cutthroat on the Clearwater, up around Cherry Lane area. And I've read obscure blog posts from 10 years ago of people who are I was up here and I caught this 18-inch cutthroat. And I'm people always think of that as a steelhead river, or you can catch bass in certain parts of the Clearwater. But I know there are cutthroat in there, and my goal is to see if I can figure it out, because that's probably that would be the closest place to catch a cutthroat if I can figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's big water, so you're not just going to like wade into most sections of that, or especially not this time of year. But
Yeah. I mean, so speaking of that, right, like you said, you can throw on a pair of Chacos and certainly later in the season, especially. But what about like big water, lake fishing? Have you guys done much mountain lake fishing for like fly fishing, that kind of thing? Or
I've hiked into a couple different mountain lakes and fished and have had success. Usually it's very clear water and you can actually see if there's fish in there.
yeah, so in Idaho stocks a lot of their mountain lakes, and so you've got these populations of cutthroat and sometimes rainbows. That are pretty big. I mean, you can, my friends, I haven't done a ton of it myself, but my wife's done a bit, even like down in the Wallowas or Seven Devils. There's others, I'm blanking, but I mean, any of those mountain lakes typically will have fish in them. So if you're going to go on a hike, if you can manage to throw a fly rod in, I totally would, because sometimes those are the easiest fish to catch and you can keep them. So when you're usually, and check their eggs, of course, but usually when you're fishing out of these mountain lakes, because they're stocked, you can grill them up lakeside.
yeah, that's a sweet little backpacking perk.
Yeah,
For sure. Yeah.
It similar to golf, it becomes a lifestyle in the sense of I'm going here for business or for pleasure. What's around there that I can fish, right? That's how golfers think. I'm going to this place for a business meeting or a vacation or whatever. Can I golf when I'm down there? What's available? So you kind of start looking at everything through that lens as you're planning your family trips and vacations and things to do. You're like, what water's around there?
Yeah.
that's totally like, I was thinking you said you floated on the Deschutes. We took a trip over spring break.
Like a rafting trip.
We just went over and hung out because we like the Sun River area.
Yeah.
And I brought my fly rod and I was like, let's go out and explore. And like the Deschutes is mostly, I think, closed, or at least the section that we were on. But there was this little tributary called like Falls Creek or something.
Mm-hmm.
Had a hatchery up there.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up catching one of the biggest rainbows that I've ever caught. It was like 20 inches long. And it was just like random, like, let's just go check it out. And it was super hard. It was like the only fish we caught, this one fish, but it ended up being this like memory that I'll keep for forever. So yeah, it's fun to do that.
Yeah, back in high school, I think it's upriver from it's upriver from Sun River on the Deschutes. It kind of meanders through this big meadow.
Yep.
And I was up there with a friend, and I wasn't into fly fishing yet, but it was probably the beginning of that phase or stage. And we had float tubes. And so we just jumped in at the top. We told his mom to pick us up in a couple hours, at the other road down lower river. And I think we had a fly rod and several spinner rods and just random stuff we grabbed. We had a blast just in a float tube, going very slow down the Deschutes on a sunny day, throwing anything we could in the water to see if we could get fish. It's a beautiful area.
Yeah. Well, I do think that's like the floating aspect of it is it can be a game changer, right? Like I remember probably still a lot of the frustrations fly fishing is like getting caught and stuff in your back cast.
Right.
And just like, I'm up against these bushes. How do I get out? And then the ability to just float down a stretch of river and hit different spots and things, whether that's inner tubes, you can get those inflatable pontoons. You can do it, like you said, relatively inexpensively. But being able to float that really allows you to cover a lot of river and get to places that you might not be able to otherwise get down to.
Absolutely.
Is that kind of, Isaac, I know you've got a drift boat. You are into that. Is that what you spend most of your time now doing?
It is in the spring, like pre-runoff. So we're middle of May here. And so we're kind of peak runoff right now. Although this year is going to be a super low water year. So I think the snowpack was, last time I looked, it was like 80% of average or median. So it's a low snow year. And so far it looks like the river may have already peaked unless we get a ton of rain. Cause we don't have any rain in the forecast currently. So, like right now we are basically fishing all the way through runoff, which is pretty unusual. So normally, because you've got all this snow and then spring rains hit, it'll warm up. And if it warms up and it rains at the same time, the snow starts melting, the snow starts melting, the river will blow out, and we basically can't even fish it during those times. So we'll do a ton of floating and fishing in like March, April, early May. And then usually you have to take a break because the most of the water comes out or is coming down in mid-May and early June. And then we'll get back to it sometime in June or 4th of July. It'll come back down far enough to where you can.
We're almost doing late June, early July fishing now.
Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone is interested in fishing this year, be aware that by probably early August, it's going to feel like late August. And so get out in July. That's probably going to be some of the best walk wade fishing that you're going to see this year. Because, once the water levels go down to their lowest, which normally doesn't happen until like September or that time frame. But if it goes to its lowest point and it's also like 100 degrees out, which it could be in August, the water warms up and fish get stressed and they don't feed as often or as normally as they do. And also it's actually hard on the fish to catch them and yank them out of the river. And sometimes you'll have more that die because they're just not doing as well. So typically it's like, that's the time of year you just say like, hey, I'm not going to go out and fish because the fish are stressed out as it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So fish earlier this year.
And that's even going higher elevations and that kind of thing. Or
No,
does it get better? Is there, when it gets like that, are there other places to go, other
Definitely.
types of fishing to do?
That's a great point. So if you go further towards the source, it's typically colder water and closer to whatever, whether it's a spring fed or whether there are springs coming into it or whether it's just a lake fed river, anytime it gets warm, going higher up is going to be colder water usually. It just has like less time to sit there in pools and get warmer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But smaller water
is better.
Yeah. Walk wade and smaller fish generally.
Yeah.
Yes
Sometimes probably more smaller fish in general, but then you'll also have some really big fish that are going up to spawn. And so you can, like I've caught some of my biggest fish like way up in the headwaters of these rivers that are going up there to spawn.
You also get the aspect that when your water drops in a creek or river, you then oftentimes will lose continual flow in the river. And then you get these sections of pools. Well, fish get trapped in there and sometimes they're big fish. And so even
they're
late,
hungry.
And they're hungry. And so late season, you can go target certain things and just fish a pool a bunch of different ways, top, middle, bottom, streamers, nymphs, just to try and get whatever fish are stuck there, which is pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I was just watching this fishing game, posted a video of one of their, there's a fish ladder with a fish, I guess a trap. I don't know what they call it, but this was way up on the Snake. So this would be Southern Idaho. And they have a population of cutthroat up there, and they kind of just showed their whole design of the, basically fish go up through this thing, they get stuck, they grab them, they measure them, weigh them, get all this data. Sometimes they tag them and then they send them on their way. So they're able to do that with these spawning, like these giant spawning cutthroat trout. That kind of stuff would be so cool. I should have been a fisheries biologist.
Since we're recording this conversation, Isaac, as an Idaho guy, what resources do you go to? What do you use for weather, stream flows, stream information, and then just news and fishing in the area? I mean, where are you watching Fish and Game catching fish?
Yeah, well, follow Fish and Game they post on Instagram, they post on Facebook, they're on social media. And so stuff that they're doing, they're putting out there. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can stay up to date with. There's a bunch of sites that post like stream flow data. I was just looking at the one. I use a water.weather.gov, which is the National Weather Service. That's the one I always check for like the St. Joe. I'll look at Calder. Mm-hmm. There's different ones that do, but then you can also go to Silverbow. I think it's silverbow.com or just Google it, but it's a fly shop in Spokane, silverbowflyshop.com. Sean is the owner. He's a great guy, and they post regular, almost weekly, I think it's weekly fishing reports for
5 rivers.
Yeah, Spokane,
rivers?
North Fork, Coeur d'Alene. They do like the Grand Ron.
Yep.
They were just saying that there's a small window right now where you could go catch. It's kind of like runoff, but not super bad runoff. And so there's a window here where you could go catch bass on the Grand Ron because all the salmon and steelhead smolts are coming out. And so if you go throw like a streamer, the bass just are looking to hammer those things. So go throw streamers on the Grand Ron right now. So they should tell you these things, and they'll tell you what flies to use.
Yeah, they give a little list of what flies are working.
Tyler at White Pine. If you're not following White Pine Fly Shop here in Moscow, you should be following. Guy lives on the river. We see each other pretty regularly. They've got a camp further upriver from us, and they're on the water a ton. So they'll post their kind of stream side fishing reports from the Joe and they go down to the Grand Ronde and float down there, and lots of good information from Tyler. And Snowtel, if you're ever interested in looking at average snowpack, I look at Snowtel. I can't remember the actual website, but if you Google it, you can probably pull that up.
And then obviously once you have all these tools, you need to know a little bit about how to use them and what flows mean and what snowpack means. But
yeah,
you can learn that pretty quickly in a season just by reading and studying and talking to people and figuring things out.
Yeah, and I'm Googling the names of flies all the time.
Right.
Someone will say, "Oh, they're fishing this," or fish are keying in on a certain fly, and I have no idea what it is, and just Google it. And lots of people out there posting videos of different patterns that they're doing, and so you get a feel for what it looks like or what it's imitating.
Mm-hmm.
And then go to your fly shop and
stopping in those fly shops. There's always happy to give information and
sell you some flies.
Yeah, and sell you some flies.
Yeah, be aware the prices are going to, you pay top dollar for those flies at the fly shop.
So you get a little info.
You get the info.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. Yeah, well, and tutorials, like you said, the internet wasn't around, but it's like now you can learn how to cast and everything on YouTube, right?
Yeah,
like
there's so much good information.
Yeah, there's step-by-step, Orvis videos and all kinds of good stuff out there to just go and try and put an indicator on, and you can do it in your backyard. And
like they have an investment in bringing up a generation of people, either a future generation or current fly fishermen. Their resources are incredible.
Yeah.
When we were in Nashville, I started fishing for maybe a year or two and then started getting my kids into it. Well, Orvis does free fly tying classes, fly fishing classes, fly casting classes. Like obviously they want to have customers, but they're giving away all this great information that is a huge resource. Like if you have something like that in your area, it's a great opportunity just to get in and learn a ton with no overhead.
Yep. North 40 in Lewiston, North 40 in Coeur d'Alene. There's an Orvis shop in Coeur d'Alene.
Yep.
There's people don't know about Red Shed Fly Shop on the Clearwater, but Red Shed, go see a guy named Poppy, guy named
talk
Poppy.
About a great video.
Oh man.
Look up there's a YouTube video on Red Shed with Poppy. It's awesome. It'll make you want to get into spay fishing.
Yeah. So he's
Silver
really
bow,
good.
Spokane.
Silver bow. I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, the fly shops are a great resource. Yeah.
Awesome. Good. Yeah, just get out there. I mean, apart from drowning, like nothing really bad can happen. You're going to spend a beautiful day out on the river and enjoy just being up in the mountains. I don't remember if I said this on the last one or not, but like Catherine, first time I got her out fly fishing, we were going up to the North Fork of the Clearwater. We were getting ready to leave, and she was just like, I don't want to go on this trip.
I can't do it.
I don't want to do it.
I'm overwhelmed.
And I'm like, Catherine, just wait. Like you're going to get out there, be standing in the river, in the mountains, and just like, you're going to love it.
You don't even have to fish.
She goes, I don't want to stand in the river. I'm like, but no, we got her out there.
You
and
don't
she
even
loved
have
it.
to fish.
Now she loves it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is. There's something about these North Idaho mountain streams in particular. It's just incredible. Like it's just amazing that we get to be in that place and just experience a day in those absolutely beautiful areas and quiet, out of cell range.
I'm sure I've said it before, but go find the small tributary streams and put on a tiny fly, or maybe not even a tiny fly, but just go catch small fish. They're out there and they're eager, and they, like if you got kids and you're trying to get kids into fly fishing, go find these small streams that come into the, like all the big rivers. I mean, all the rivers we have around here are fairly good sized, the kind of river that could sweep you away if you get in a little too far, but they all have tributaries and most of them have fish in them. And so those fish will tend to be smaller, but they tend to be more eager. They will attack your fly. And if you miss them, they'll attack it again. And you sit there and you just practice your timing and you practice, setting the hook. It's great for kids. It's, honestly, that's what I did the first time we went, back to the Joe. We got on one of those little creeks, and I think I sat there and I caught like 5 or so little 6-inchers in a row, and just was like, all right, pick up a little confidence, have some fun, and then go find something bigger.
It's awesome. Any parting thoughts?
Welcome spring.
Yeah.
Glad it's here.
When you live in North Idaho, people look forward to the spring for many reasons.
Yeah.
Fishing is just one of them.
Yeah.
It's here. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for the river beers.
Yeah. Thanks,
Cheers.
Mike. This is fun. We should do this weekly. I'd love to get together and just talk about fishing. If we can't
And
actually
drink river
be
If we
fishers.
can't, let's go do it on the river next time.
Thanks for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next week.